Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov Chess channel and welcome back to the 1986 World Chess Championship match between Anatoly Karpov and Garry Kasparov. So we have covered so far two great games from this event, one winning game by Kasparov but also one winning game by Karpov, and that was the last game that we have covered in the series. It was really a beautiful positional brilliancy by Anatoly Karpov, and we're now in the game 8, and in my opinion the game 8 was a critical moment. It had I think really sort of a psychological aspect, because I think this game 8 really broke Karpov's spirit, because I think similar thing happened in the World Chess Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Jan Nepomniachtchi, where when Nepomniachtchi lost the game 6, I think it broke also his spirit. So that's why I think a similar thing happened here. Anatoly Karpov had really good chances in some games to even win some games, but he didn't make that happen. And here in the game 8, I think the spirit was broken, because the way that he lost the game is also very important, because here in this game Garry Kasparov played really beautiful attacking chess, where really Anatoly Karpov didn't have any counterplay at all. So that's why it was, in my opinion, one of the critical moments of this super match. So let's check out now the game. So we have now d4 here played by Garry Kasparov. We have d5 by Karpov, c4 the queen's gambit, the e6 the queen's gambit decline, and after move knight to c3 we have now the so-called Charustek variation with the move bishop to e7. It's a delaying idea, but we're not allowing, if you play for instance the move knight to f6, then you could get pinned with the move bishop to g5. So the move bishop to e7 delays a little bit the knight move. So we have now c takes d5, the exchange variation, e takes d5, and now bishop to f4, attacking the c7 weakness. In some occasions this weakness can be further attacked, but not immediately, because it can of course be protected with the move a6, also bishop to b4. Then are some ideas. So far it's not a dangerous square here, this c7 weakness. So here after move bishop to f4 we have now knight to f6, normal development, and now e3, now bishop to d3. And many times when white is playing the exchange variation in the queen's gambit decline, we have sort of a setup that I used many times, and I thought also that Garry Kasparov would use this setup, but he played a little bit different. Here the main goal is to play queen to c2, knight to e2, f3, e4. Then you could have really a dominant center position, and then of course with this long diagonal, with this queen and bishop battery, with the activity of this bishop, with the centralized knights on e2 and c3, and the potential e4 breakthrough, white could have really dominant game. It's playable for both sides. There are also many games in this types of setups that won black won also, but as I said, it's a beautiful setup that you can try sometimes out. Queen to c2, knight to e2, after e4. So check it out. Sometimes I think it's something worth to study. But here Anatoly Karpov is not allowing this scenario with the move c5, because he's breaking already. If you now play f3, then of course c takes d4, e takes d4 could happen, and then with the move f3 your dark squares are a little bit weak, then you could be vulnerable here around the f2, also the b2. So far here Karpov is not allowing these ideas, but for the risk of an isolated pawn on d5, because many times black is proceeding with the more normal c6, fixing the pawn structure in the center more, which is the more solid way of course to play the game. c5 is of course much more aggressive, but you leave in many occasions after d takes c5 an isolated d5 pawn. So you can be the judge of this position. Sometimes we play positional chess, sometimes we play more aggressive chess. I think the move c5 was already a surprise element, because maybe Kasparov expected some solid positional stuff that Karpov used to play recently. So really already aggressive move. So here after move c5 Kasparov develops with the move knight to f3. We have now knight to c6 and castling. We have now bishop to g4, and here Karpov is already announcing a battle around the square d4, but Kasparov undermines the pressure. Here d takes c5. After bishop to c5 we have now h3. The problem after bishop to h5 is that I think here white can still proceed with the move g4, even if you sacrifice knight takes g4, h takes g4, bishop to g4, still everything is defendable with move bishop to e2 and then knight to h2. So these tactical shots are not working. So that's why here f3 was played by Anatoly Karpov, and after queen to f3 what Karpov hoped for here is a simplification idea, because he has an isolated pawn, and what you do when you play with an isolated pawn, then of course you want to get rid of it by playing d4. You want to push it further and then simplify the position. But the problem about the move d4 is that you get this idea, knight to e4, and it's now already a really weird position, because if you take knight to e4, then of course queen to e4 already threaten checkmate. If you play f5, then you weaken the pawn structure a little bit, but you can also take out with the bishop, and now with the queen and bishop battery, there's simply, I think, too much to handle here. The bishop and queen batteries, I think, causing many positional problems. Then rook to c1 could continue the pressure against the bishop and also against the knight on c6. So that's why here Karpov didn't want to risk anything, although, for instance, the engines these days are suggesting this line. But as I said, I think already white is much better here because of the bishop's activity. It's an open game. Bishops love, of course, the open game, so it's already a weird position for white. After move knight to e4, here Karpov retreated with the bishop on e7, and here really beautiful move here by Garry Kasparov. He plays now rook to d1. He doesn't want to take, of course. If you take on d4, then you invite your opponent's knight into the game, and the most important thing that we have to notice here, the knight on d4 move then would come against the direct attack against the queen. So that's why here rook to d1, placing the rook where already the queen is. And I liked really here Garry Kasparov's choice. Many of us, I think, would play rook from f to d1, where of course the rook on a1 is protecting the a2 pawn, but not Garry Kasparov. He's saying, I could maybe use in the near future this rook on the f file, because I have sort of a queen and rook battery on the f file, and now I could use this other rook on the d file, because I don't care about these weaknesses. If you want to take this pawns, take it, but look at this setup that Garry Kasparov has built here. Really wild bishop here, already aiming against h7, the queen on a very active square, bishop perfectly fine, knight centralized, rook on the d file, this other rook can come on the e file. We can also agree after d takes e3, f takes e3, the f file could get open. So many attacking opportunities here for white. Okay, as we said here, Karpov played now queen to a5, attacking the a2 pawn, but it doesn't matter. The activity of white's pieces is a great compensation for the potential loss of one single pawn. So really beautiful attacking chess here already by Garry Kasparov. So after move queen to a5, here Garry plays a beautiful move knight to g3. I like this move because it's not allowing further trades of pieces. Garry Kasparov is saying, I'm staying now with the pieces on the board. I want to complicate things. I want to play still active chess, and you see the importance of the knight in the continuation of the game. The knight on g3 will have a huge important value here around the square f5. So that's why this maneuver, knight to g3, knight to f5, is really a beautiful idea here by Garry Kasparov. So we have d takes e3, and again, one of the critical moments of the game. Many of us would play bishop to e3, would not allow here maybe to get an isolated pawn, because if you take with f takes e3, then the pawn on e3 could be a long-term weakness. But here Garry Kasparov took with the pawn. He played really a wild chess. He opened now the f file, and now with the queen and rook are building really a beautiful battery. So here let's see possible continuation. For instance, if you try bishop to e3, nothing would be wrong, I think, here also with this move, because even if you try some ideas of knight to e5, then we can play queen to f5. You cannot take the bishop on d3 because of this threats on the a file. You could maybe try to get the queen out of the range, but then of course white is also maneuvering the bishop to b1 and still can stay on this very active diagonal. So here in the continuation, after d takes e3, here queen takes a2 was played. So Garry Kasparov sacrificed one pawn. Even if you try again this idea knight to e5, maybe to trade off some important pieces to get rid of one of these active bishops, you want to either allow your opponent to take on e5 with the bishop, or you will take the bishop on d3. This tactics is not working because of queen takes b7, and the problem is now after knight takes d3, rook takes d3, you don't have time to take any of these pawns because the bishop is hanging. You cannot also attack the queen because the bishop is controlling the b8 square. So really already beautiful calculations by Garry Kasparov, so he's not allowing simplification ideas to trade off more pieces, so that's why he allowed here. Okay, you can take out the pawn, that's not important, but I don't want to trade pieces. That's now the most important thing here to recognize. So here knight to f5 played by Garry Kasparov, occupying really this important weakness in black's position. We have queen to e6, and now beautiful tactical shot bishop to h6, attacking further the g7 weakness. The problem is now you cannot take, of course. Then you get something like queen to g3. This could be already a checkmate threat. You have to play then knight to g4, queen to g4, and whatever you do, even if you cover with the queen, then the problem is now knight to h6 wins the queen, or even knight to e7. Whatever you do, it comes with a discovered check. You cannot take the knight because of the activity on the g file, or you can play immediately knight to e7, check also here. And also the bishop would be attacking the queen on g6. So what you could do here maybe is to cover yourself with the bishop, but now with h4 you lose this piece for sure. So as I said, really a beautiful tactical shot here by Garry Kasparov, but after move bishop to h6, of course Karpov didn't react here. He played now knight to e8, the only defensive move. So we have now queen to h5. Look at this attacking setup by Garry Kasparov. What he's threatening is, of course, somehow to liberate this knight, to get this knight out of the range of the bishop, and then also to liberate this bishop, and then of course the queen and bishop would aim against this h7, where it could be already a checkmate. Really nice attacking formation by Garry Kasparov. g6, we have queen to g5. You cannot take, of course. Here the g file is occupied. We have knight to e5, and now queen to g3 here by Garry Kasparov. We have bishop to f6, controlling now further the g7, and now bishop to b5. Although probably knight to d4 is also perfectly fine. Then with bishop to e2 we could control this knight, and also h4 h5 then afterwards is a beautiful idea to undermine a little bit this pawn chain that black is here in front of the king. So this defensive setup is so far perfectly fine, but with h4 h5 in the near future it can be broken. Then maybe some bishop to g6, queen takes g6 are opportunities there. The rook is very active, also aiming against this f7. So really a beautiful move it would have been, because also we can see the rook is hanging. So there are simply so many tactical ideas that are really it would take me for maybe half an hour just to explain all of these tactical shots. But after move bishop to b5, this was, I think, now maybe even a slightly inaccurate move here by Garry Kasparov, where he allowed now Anatoly Karpov to regroup, because he played now this normal move knight to g7, and it seems so that Karpov has defended. But again, Kasparov finds beautiful ideas. He plays now bishop to g7, bishop to g7. Still, you see this knight is hanging, so the knight stayed there forever. The knight will stay on f5 through the whole game. Here in the continuation, we have a rook to d6. Look how Garry Kasparov is still attacking this position, although the engine gives here only a slight advantage for white, but still this attacking flow that Garry Kasparov is doing here, really wild stuff. He's not allowing here Anatoly Karpov to breathe, and when you're only on the defensive side through the whole game, you will probably make a mistake. That was, I think, the psychological beauty of this game, because Garry Kasparov attacked here through the whole game. Although there were some inaccuracies, but he really, as I said, didn't allow here Karpov to breathe. So here after move rook to d6, queen to b3, we have knight takes g7, and now queen takes b5. But now again knight to f5. This is really one of the most annoying knights that I've seen in my life. After move knight to f5, we have rook from a to d8, and here rook to f6. Look where this rook is coming. Really tricky stuff here by Garry Kasparov. We have now rook to d2. Here Karpov is also trying some attacks against this weak d2, but now after queen to g5, we have queen takes b2, and now king to h1. Here Garry Kasparov gets out of the range. What he wants to get is, of course, sort of an extra tempo. He wants maybe to sneak in with the queen, and then of course the rook takes g2 a move would not come with a check. That's now the most important thing about this move, king to h1. I'm not sure how many of us would see this move. I'm not sure how many of us would even consider the move king to h1, but it was a really brilliant calm move. So here by Garry Kasparov. So we have now king to h8. Here Anatoly Karpov makes now a huge mistake. Probably the better way is to play something like rook to d7 to compete somehow on the 6th rank, but actually here there are even some possibilities with knight to h6, and here if you try something like knight to f5 again, then of course it will be perpetual. petrol. But now with rook to f4, or maybe you can also try this one, rook from the first rank to f4, it gets really messed up, because now the h file could be really a huge thing here for white to attack. So that was one of the tactical possibilities, but actually the only way to defend this is to play now the move rook to d7. But Karpov played now a huge mistake. He played king to h1, which allowed now here this move knight to d4, and there's not a good way anymore to protect everything. The knight is hanging. If you move the knight, then you lose the c7 weakness. So that's why here in this position Karpov tried rook takes d4 to sacrifice the rook for the exchange, but now after queen takes e5, it was game over. So really beautiful stuff. So whatever you do, even if you try, of course, here some coverages of some discovered attack, then queen to e7 is perfectly fine. You lose the battle here around this square, and it's practically over. You have lost your activity on the second rank. That was basically your main strength. There's not a good way anymore to protect everything. The rook is hanging, so it's game over. So really beautiful game by Garry Kasparov. You see the knight on f5 stayed there really forever, and that's how you attack weaknesses in your opponent's position. Really a beautiful strategical attack by the world champion Garry Kasparov. If you want to see more of these games, I really covered many Garry Kasparov, Anatoly Karpov. Check them out. They're really instructive. You have so many strategical ideas. You have really some beautiful opening principles. So also some improvements, theoretical improvements in particular positions. So really beautiful matches they have played, and that's why I decided to cover more of these games. And in the continuation of the series, we're following still the 1986 World Chess Championship. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. I really enjoyed it a lot. If you want to see more of these games, check out my Garry Kasparov series so far, and if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.